For our generation, when we look at language loss, we look to those generations in the late 19th century, who I believe it was due to the pressures of survival, because our people by that stage had been relegated to very small reserves. We've lost access to our mahika kai. We've been decimated through epidemics and diseases such as measles, influenza, tuberculosis. It's had a huge impact, and we're very impoverished. Part of our adapting to this new world and these pressures was abandoning some of our traditions, abandoning our language, because for our children to survive in this world, English was advantageous. So, to seek employment and to exist in this new society, especially when being Māori was viewed so negatively. And, we see the corruption of our names. People just lost sight of our language. Not just our people, Kāi Tahu, but those early Europeans as well. And so, within 3 generations, Te Reo Māori is almost extinct in our native villages here.
My father's Māori and my mother is Anglo-Saxon. So my father's parents, my grandmother, she's Ngāi Tahu. Her husband, my grandfather, he's from here. He was more Kāi Tahu, and so he descends down through the Bryant Palmer whakapapa. So he comes from the early whaling days. So the whalers, obviously, they were some of the first Europeans here, and they intermarried within the local Māori community. So most of us that whapapapa to this area or to the Atako Ruananga and that come from that mix of both local Māori and the whalers. I knew the connections, but I didn't sort of understand it. You're growing up, you're just who you are. And that I knew there was definitely a way of mixed blood, because we had our own sort of little hapu. My grandparents lived with us and cousins and so forth and that. So yeah, we kind of knew. People let us know. Brothers look Māori, I look Pākehā. You know the story?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Having your grandparents live with you, did they share stories that...
No, they hid it. They didn't want to bar of it. No.
That generation, eh?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Oh, because you'd get persecuted, you wouldn't get work, or, you end up the labourer, farmhand.
It's the racism of that generation.
Time. Yeah. That really affected my father. He carried a lot of anger because of it. He hardly ever talked about it. So it was different. You were treated different.
We talk a lot about language trauma, and from that experience of intergenerational loss comes a sense of whakamā or shame for not knowing our pūrākau, not knowing our language. For many of us, we weren't raised with our language or our history. We've had to, go out there, kimihia, rangahaua, just keep researching and finding, seeking authenticity in these stories. And that's really part of our Kāi Tahu story as well, is the loss of not only our mahinga kai and our whenua, but our mahinga kai practices, our language. These wāhi tipuna, such as Te Nohako Tukiauau, it gives us that opportunity not only to restore that connection to the whenua, but to those stories and to our whakapapa and to our language.
So you didn't hear that AO growing up?
No, never spoken. No, it was completely hidden. Everybody got Pākehā names. Just kind of how it was, I suppose. Only a friend of my father's visited me many years later, and he says, "We all knew you had a bit of bro in you." I go, "Really?" Yeah, so that was just within the community. Yeah, so yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, just the way it is.
Right from, the earliest arrival of European, and our people were adapting. They were, embraced the new technology, the new tools. Part of that also was the new language, and wanting to become global citizens, especially in trade in those early times. So the value of learning the new language was held in high importance. So by the time the first missionaries arrived here was James Watkins in 1840 here in Otago. His journals note the desire or the strong demand for literacy, and so whānau were lining up wanting to have lessons, and he couldn't keep up with the demand. Apparently he was sending back for more resources and books because they were just sort of walking out the door, which would be great to see. Seeing the value of literacy, our people really, once those land deeds had been established and they saw that those contracts or those arrangements weren't being honoured, another form of resistance, I guess, or a pursuit of justice was picking up the pen and using those Pākehā systems.
It was absolutely obvious that we were of Maori descent, particularly when you look at my older brothers, but my father would never talk about it. He just thought it was not good to be Maori in the Pākehā world, really, to do well.
We didn't use Maori terms in our upbringing at all. It was discouraged from speaking any place names and descriptive names of use in Maori. So we lost a lot of our identity that way too.
For my tamariki, they are the first generation born post-settlement. Putting, not completely to rest, but having an opportunity to address that grievance gives us a new pathway forward. And so we can now focus our energies on rebuilding ourselves, restoring our language, restoring our connections. And a huge part of that has been learning the language. It's more than just a language, and it really does connect you to our tupuna and to their worldviews. When you have the opportunity to understand te reo Māori and then to read these manuscripts written by their hands, left to us, these absolute jewels that are treasured by our generation, and to labour over these manuscripts and research and to analyse deeply what they left to us. It's taken this generation to have access to that language, to be able to unlock, I call it unlocking the code within these manuscripts, and also gives us that ability to cross-reference. So most of our records, about our history and places and things, are all written by European who didn't have a command of our language. So we can look at those European records and value them for what they were, but then we can, if we're fortunate enough to find a Māori language manuscript, we can cross-reference those narratives and those stories. Of course, we're always going to lean on the indigenous version. Having some of these narratives, some of this kōrero and whakapapa left to us has really enabled us to restore our dialect as well.
We didn't hear stories about my father's and his grandfather growing up in the Māori world because we didn't hear those stories, didn't hear about this kaika, didn't hear about the draining of Lake Tatawai. It was a loss of family history when it wasn't discussed around the family table. It was just a blank in our lives, our past lives, that we've been trying to fill ever since. You know, what did happen? Why did this kaika fall over and to get dispersed? And so here I feel it's just a loss of identity, because it was just a big gap.
Well, pretty well. That mirrors exactly what we felt with not being that knowledge shared with us. I found it quite bizarre because my other grandmother, who was Maori and that, she actually lived down by their Takaruananga for years. So I used to go down there and play as a child, not even realising that that was actually my ruananga. my grandmother knew. However, my grandmother used to interact with the Maori community, but my father didn't.
No.
These ones, but this is, I'm pretty certain this is Maori Kui and William.
Yeah.
Here is what I've always been led to.
I'm privileged to work for Te Runanga o Kāi Tahu and lead our Māori language strategy, Ko Tahi Mano Kaika, and really it's a movement. It's a movement of whānau across Aotearoa and even reaching into Ahitereiria now. And you know, Te Reo has been a real vehicle for connecting us to broken knowledge systems, and the reo can only survive if it's a spoken living language. So our focus is on Te Reo is the vernacular, the language of communication, the language of love, the language of debate in the home as a whānau, as a living language, and taking Te Reo wherever we go. And so that's been a big challenge for us. We've got a small battalion of whānau who have fought long and hard to have Te Reo Māori as a language of their whānau, and that's mainly been around domains such as the urban settings, in the home, on marae, at wānanga. We've done that quite successfully. However, a challenge for us is to take our language back into our natural environment as we're restoring those traditional practices in mahinga kai. We need to restore the language that's associated with that too.
There was a loss of identity in that, particularly with my whānau, because we had two lines of distinct Maori whapapapa and that, and neither was shared with us, except for my grandmother. She knew all the connections, but again she would seldom ever speak about it.
Yeah, well, interesting was the European side of my family. We heard all the history about that. That was always where they came from, the old country, and where they landed and what ship they came out on, and how the hardship of breaking in land as settlers. So we heard all those stories, but we didn't hear from the other side of the family, our tangata whenua.
Yeah. We certainly knew a European heritage, and that, but again, iwi heritage was suppressed, unfortunately. But in saying that, we've been on, both myself and the rest of my siblings and that, we've managed to reconnect and find out where our roots come from and the rich stories behind it. That's been rewarding.
I hear a lot of whānau saying they don't feel Māori enough, and you know, we're Māori enough, it's in our DNA, and to grow confidence in speaking our indigenous language, I think that's the most rewarding experience in my lifetime, at least, knowing that that my mum and my aunties and uncles are really proud to hear their mokopuna speaking Māori so naturally, and it helps them move through some of that pain and or that trauma, seeing hope in the new generations, and that was, for many of us, that was one of the main motivating factors for doing the hard yards ourselves as second language learners, was so that our kids didn't ever have to experience the same sense of whakamā, that they would be raised right from the outset, knowing exactly who they are, be raised with as much of a Māori worldview that we could provide them through our second language learning eyes, that they would be raised with our stories here as normalised. They have experiences of not learning Humpty Dumpty or Little Bo Peep, but learning mō tia and going to bed with stories of ruatapu and paikea, and instilling in them that identity and pride, being from Kāi Tahu, being from all their iwi. Yeah.
I'm the chair of the Urupā committee that keeps the lawn mowed, and it's not a working Urupā, it's a historic one now, and but we just like to care for it, and so our ancestors feel looked after.